Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The call came through at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday night in October 2018. I was already in bed, scrolling through my phone with the TV playing some rerun in the background, when I saw my sister Chloe's name light up the screen. She was driving from Anchorage to Fairbanks for a job interview at some environmental consulting firm. A 7-hour drive she'd insisted on doing alone despite my protests. "Hey, just wanted to let you know I'm taking a quick break," she said, and I could hear the exhaustion creeping into her voice. She'd been on the road for about 4 hours at that point, somewhere past Cantwell on the Parks Highway. The connection kept cutting in and out, but I could make out the sound of her car's hazard lights clicking in the background. She told me she'd found a pullout area with a decent view of Denali, even though it was too dark to actually see the mountain. I remember asking her if she felt safe stopping there alone, especially that late at night. The Parks Highway gets pretty desolate once you pass the small towns, just endless stretches of wilderness, no cell towers, no streetlights, nothing but darkness and the occasional trucker passing through. Chloe just laughed it off the way she always did when I worried too much. "There's literally nobody here, Jess. I haven't seen another car in like 20 minutes, she said. I could hear her car door open, the little ding-ding-ding warning sound it made when the keys were still in the ignition. She said she just needed to stretch her legs for 5 minutes, grab some water from the cooler in her back seat, maybe eat one of those protein bars she'd packed. The last thing she said to me was that she'd text me when she got back on the road, and then again when she reached Fairbanks. I told her to be careful. She said, "Always am," and then the call dropped. I figured it was just the spotty coverage out there. I went back to my show, but I kept checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for that text saying she was back on the road. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I sent her a quick, "You good" message, but it showed as undelivered. That wasn't unusual. The cell service along that highway is basically non-existent for huge stretches. Still, this nagging worry started building in my chest. Chloe was always good about checking in, especially when she knew I was anxious about her traveling alone. By 1 a.m., I'd called her phone 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail, not even ringing first. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she decided to take a longer break. Maybe she even decided to nap for a bit. But Chloe had a car charger. She never let her phone die, and she definitely wouldn't nap at some random pullout in the middle of nowhere. She was too smart for that, too cautious despite her bravado. At 2 a.m., I called the Alaska State Troopers. The dispatcher was professional but clearly thought I was overreacting. "Ma'am, it's only been a couple of hours since you last heard from her," she said in that practiced, patient tone they probably use for worried relatives all the time. But when I explained the exact situation, that Chloe had pulled over on the Parks Highway around mile marker 185, that she was alone, that her phone was going straight to voicemail, the dispatcher's tone shifted slightly. She took down Chloe's information, her full name, the make and model of her car, a silver 2016 Subaru Outback, her license plate number, what she was wearing when she left, jeans, hiking boots, and her favorite green Columbia jacket. The dispatcher said they'd send a trooper to check that stretch of highway on their next patrol, which would be around sunrise. I spent the rest of the night on my couch, phone in hand, watching the clock and jumping at every notification that wasn't from Chloe. The call from the troopers came at 7:23 a.m. I answered before the first ring finished. The officer identified himself as Trooper Daniels, and something in his voice made my whole body go rigid. He said they'd located Chloe's vehicle at a pullout area near mile marker 186, exactly where she'd described. The car was just sitting there, driver's door wide open, hazard lights still blinking weakly as the battery drained. Her purse was on the passenger seat with her wallet inside, untouched. Her phone was on the floor by the gas pedal, screen cracked like it had been dropped. The keys were still in the ignition, and when the trooper turned them, the engine started right up. She had over half a tank of gas. But here's what made no sense. The engine block was still warm when they found it at 7 a.m., as if the car had been running until very recently. That meant either Chloe had been there just minutes before the trooper arrived, or someone else had been running that engine through the night. Trooper Daniels kept asking me questions while his partner searched the area. Had Chloe been depressed? Was she having problems with anyone? Did she mention meeting someone? I wanted to scream at him that none of that mattered because Chloe would never just walk away from her car like that. She wouldn't leave her purse, she wouldn't leave her phone, and she definitely wouldn't leave the door hanging open with the keys in the ignition. The trooper said they were checking the immediate vicinity. There was forest on one side of the pullout and a steep slope down to a creek on the other. He promised they'd have a search team and dogs out there within the hour. I told him I was getting in my car right now, that I'd be there in 4 hours. He tried to discourage me, said I should wait by my phone in case Chloe called, but I was already grabbing my keys. Before we hung up, he asked me what Chloe had been wearing again. When I told him about the green Columbia jacket, there was a pause. "We found a jacket in the car," he said carefully. "Green Columbia. It was folded neatly on the back seat." The drive to that pullout was the longest 4 hours of my life. I called everyone. Our parents in Florida, Chloe's roommate back in Anchorage, her ex-boyfriend Nathan, who she'd remained friends with, even her boss at the outdoor gear store where she worked part-time. Nobody had heard from her since yesterday afternoon. Nathan mentioned something that made my chest tighten. Chloe had called him around 9 p.m., a couple hours before she called me, and she'd seemed weird. Not upset exactly, but distracted. She'd asked him a strange question. Did he remember that time they'd gone camping near Denali and heard those voices in the woods at night? When he said yeah, those were probably just other campers. She'd gone quiet and then changed the subject. He didn't think much of it at the time, but now it seemed significant. By the time I reached mile marker 186, there were 3 trooper vehicles, a search and rescue van, and 2 civilian pickup trucks that belonged to volunteer searchers from Cantwell. The pullout was exactly as Chloe had described, a wide gravel area carved into the side of the highway, big enough for maybe 4 or 5 cars. Her Subaru was still there, now surrounded by orange traffic cones. I parked and immediately ran to the car, but a trooper stopped me before I could touch anything. They were treating it as a potential crime scene. From where I stood, I could see inside, her traveling coffee mug in the cup holder, still half full of what looked like cold coffee. A bag of trail mix spilled across the back floor, her sleeping bag rolled up in the back with her overnight bag. Everything looked so normal, like she'd just stepped away for a second. The search teams were spread out through the woods calling her name. The dogs had picked up her scent leading from the car toward the tree line, but it stopped abruptly about 30 feet in, just stopped, like she'd vanished into thin air. One of the dog handlers, an older guy named Bill, pulled me aside and said something that still haunts me. "In 40 years of doing this, I've never seen a scent trail just end like that. Usually it goes up a tree, into water, or to a vehicle. But this, it's like she just ceased to exist at that spot." They searched for 3 days. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the wilderness. Divers checked the creek even though it was only 3 feet deep at its deepest point. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through miles of forest. They brought in special equipment, thermal cameras, ground-penetrating radar, everything. The FBI even got involved because of the strange circumstances. On the second day, they found something that nobody could explain. About a quarter mile from the pullout, deeper in the woods than anyone thought Chloe could have gone on foot in the dark, they found her hiking boots. They were placed, not dropped, but deliberately placed, side by side on a fallen log, laces still tied. The socks were tucked neatly inside each boot. No footprints led to or from that spot, which made no sense because the ground was soft from recent rain. The forensics team took photos from every angle, measured everything, but couldn't explain how those boots got there without leaving a single track in the mud. Then things got stranger. The forensics team processing Chloe's car found something odd about her phone. Yes, it was cracked, but when they managed to power it on, they discovered that between 11:47 p.m., when she called me, and 2:47 a.m., the phone had taken 73 photographs. All of them were completely black. Not dark like night photos. Completely, uniformly black, even though the flash had fired for each one. The metadata showed they were taken at intervals ranging from 30 seconds to 12 minutes apart. The phone's GPS showed it hadn't moved from that pullout during those 3 hours. The last photo was taken at 2:47 a.m., and then nothing. The battery still had 31% charge when they found it. Her call log showed 17 missed calls from an unknown number between midnight and 2 a.m., all from a number that didn't exist when they tried to trace it. The phone company had no record of those calls in their system, but there they were on Chloe's phone, each one lasting exactly 7 seconds. On the 4th day, the search was called off. The official report lists Chloe as a missing person, case still open but not actively investigated. The troopers' theory was that she had some kind of mental break, wandered into the woods, and succumbed to the elements. They suggested maybe she'd been picked up by someone passing by, even though no vehicles were caught on the highway cameras during that time window. But none of that explains the boots, the photos, the impossible phone calls, or how her scent just stopped. I hired a private investigator who spent 2 months on the case. He found something the police had missed or maybe just didn't want to acknowledge. In the 5 years before Chloe disappeared, there had been 6 other missing persons cases along that exact stretch of the park's highway. Different years, different seasons, but all between mile markers of 180 and 190. All were people traveling alone. All vehicles were found with engines still warm, doors open, personal items undisturbed. None of them were ever found. I still drive that stretch of highway sometimes. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help myself. I park at that same pullout and stand where Chloe's car was found. Last month, almost 6 years after she disappeared, I was there around midnight, the same time she'd called me that night. I was about to leave when my phone rang. Unknown number, my heart nearly stopped. I answered, but there was only silence. Not dead air. I could hear something like wind through trees, but different. Hollower. The call lasted exactly 7 seconds before it disconnected. When I looked at my phone, there was no record of the call in my log. I drove home and haven't been back since. But sometimes, late at night, my phone will light up with a notification that immediately disappears. And I just know, it's Chloe, trying to tell me something about what happened at mile marker 186. I've accepted that I'll never know what that something is. The not knowing is worse than grief. At least with grief, you have an ending. Most people in my town knew my brother Jason as the guy who could navigate any trail blindfolded. He'd been hiking since he was 12, had summited every major peak within a 300-mile radius, and kept a detailed journal of every single trek he'd ever taken. The morning of November 8, 2016, he texted our family group chat a photo of his hiking boots next to his beat-up Ford Ranger, with the message, "Crow pass today, solo run, should be back before dinner." That was the last time any of us heard from him. What happened over the next 48 hours still keeps me awake at night, not because of what we found, but because of what we didn't find, and the single detail that made absolutely no sense to any of the search and rescue teams who combed that mountain. I was sitting in my apartment in Anchorage, grading papers for my 8th grade science class, when Mom called around 9 that evening. Jason hadn't come home, hadn't answered his phone, and Dad had already driven out to the trailhead to check if his truck was still there. It was. The doors were locked, his emergency supplies still in the back, and fresh tire tracks in the gravel showed he'd arrived that morning just like he said he would. Dad said the temperature was dropping fast, already below 20 degrees, and Jason had only packed for a day hike. By the time I made it to my parents' house, Mom had already called the Rangers, and we were organizing everyone we knew who could help search. The first responders told us to wait until morning, that Jason knew those trails better than anyone and had probably just decided to camp out, but something in my gut told me this was different. At first light, about 30 of us gathered at the trailhead parking area. The search and rescue coordinator, a weathered woman named Diane who'd been doing this for 20 years, split us into groups of 4 and assigned us sections of the trail. My group got the first 3 miles, the easiest part, which made sense since I wasn't exactly an expert hiker like Jason. The snow from the previous night had left about 2 inches of fresh powder on the ground, and that's when we found the first thing that made everyone stop talking. Jason's boot prints were clear as day, those distinctive Salomon treads he always wore, heading up the trail at a steady pace. We could see where he'd stopped to adjust his pack, where he'd stepped aside to let someone pass, where he'd paused to probably take a photo at the scenic overlook. Following his tracks was like reading his morning in perfect detail, each step preserved in the snow like he'd left them just minutes ago. The weird part started around mile marker 2. Jason's tracks suddenly became erratic, like he'd started jogging, then sprinting, his stride length nearly doubling. But here's what made no sense. There were no other tracks around his, nothing chasing him, no animal prints, no signs of another person, just Jason's boots hitting the ground harder and faster, veering off the main trail into the tree line. We followed them through the pines, branches still showing where he'd pushed through, until we reached a small clearing about 50 yards from the trail. And that's where everything just stopped. His footprints led right to the center of this clearing, maybe 20 feet across, and then nothing. The snow beyond was completely untouched, like he'd just ceased to exist mid-stride. No backtracking, no signs of him climbing a tree, no disturbance in the snow canopy above. Diane stood there for a full minute, walking the perimeter of that clearing, checking and rechecking what we were all seeing. The search team spent the entire day combing every inch of that mountain. Dogs were brought in, and they tracked Jason's scent to that exact same clearing before going crazy, whining and circling like they'd hit an invisible wall. A helicopter with thermal imaging flew grid patterns until dark, picking up deer, a couple of black bears denning up for winter, but no heat signature that could be Jason. The state police arrived around noon and immediately started treating it like a crime scene. Even though there was no evidence of foul play, they took photos of every footprint, measured the stride length, analyzed the pattern of his movement. One detective kept asking if Jason had any enemies, if he owed anyone money, if he'd been acting strange lately. But Jason was the most straightforward guy you'd ever meet. Worked as a physical therapist, coached Little League on weekends, had been planning his wedding to his girlfriend Amy for next spring. The only unusual thing anyone could remember was Jason mentioning he'd seen some old survey markers on his last hike up Crow Pass, the kind they used in the 60s for geological studies, but that hardly seemed relevant. By the second day, the story had made the local news, and volunteers were showing up from Anchorage, Girdwood, even some from Fairbanks. The military sent a specialized Arctic rescue unit, and someone brought ground-penetrating radar to check if he'd fallen into a hidden crevasse or snow cave. They found nothing. The clearing became command central, with investigators studying every inch of ground. That's when one of the forensics guys noticed something that made everyone reconsider what we were dealing with. The snow in Jason's final footprints had an unusual quality to it. It was compressed differently than his other tracks, denser, like it had been subjected to enormous pressure. They took samples back to the lab and found microscopic glass spheres in the snow, the kind that only forms under extreme heat. But there were no burn marks, no signed vegetation, no evidence of any heat source at all. Just those tiny beads of glass mixed into the snow where Jason's tracks ended. On day 3, Amy showed up at the search site with something that changed everything. She'd gone through Jason's home office, desperate for any clue, and found a folder he'd hidden behind his filing cabinet. Inside were printed emails and documents about something called Project Greenlight, dated from the 1960s. The papers described atmospheric testing conducted on Crow Pass, some kind of military research into electromagnetic pulses and their effects on weather patterns. Jason had apparently been researching this for months, cross-referencing old military records with geological surveys. There were photos he'd taken of those survey markers, notes about unusual magnetic readings on his compass, and a map where he'd marked several locations with red X's. The clearing where his tracks ended was circled 3 times in black ink, with a note in Jason's handwriting. Source point, November 1967 incident. 2 researchers missing, never found. Amy said Jason had become obsessed with these findings recently, but didn't want to worry anyone. Thought people would think he was being paranoid. The military response to those documents was immediate and unsettling. Within 2 hours of Amy showing them to the state police, the entire trail was closed to civilians. People in hazmat suits arrived and set up a perimeter around the clearing. They brought in equipment I'd never seen before. Large panels that looked like satellite dishes, machines that hummed with a low frequency you could feel in your chest. My family was told to go home, that professionals were handling it now. But I stayed hidden in the trees with my dad's hunting binoculars, watched them work through the night. They were taking core samples from the ground, setting up sensors in a precise grid pattern. Around midnight, one of their machines started going haywire, lights flashing red, that humming sound growing louder until it was almost unbearable. Then, for just a second, I saw something that still makes me question my own eyes. The air in the center of the clearing seemed to ripple, like heat waves off hot asphalt, except it was 15 degrees outside. The snow in that exact spot where Jason's tracks ended began to swirl upward in a perfect spiral, defying gravity, before suddenly dropping back down. The next morning, the official story changed completely. The news reported that Jason had been found, suffering from severe hypothermia, near a ranger station 15 miles north of where we'd been searching. They said he'd gotten disoriented in the snow, wandered off trail and survived by building a snow shelter. But here's the thing, I went to see him in the hospital, and the person in that bed wasn't my brother. I mean, it was him physically. Same scar on his chin from a bike accident when we were kids, same tattoo of mountain coordinates on his wrist, even knew things only Jason would know. But something fundamental was different. He spoke in this measured, careful way, like he was translating thoughts from another language. His eyes would focus on empty spaces in the room, tracking something invisible. When I asked him about the clearing, about what happened when his tracks ended, he just stared at me for the longest time before saying, "I was walking, then I was walking somewhere else, then I was walking back." The doctors said trauma and hypothermia could cause personality changes, memory gaps, but Amy knew it too. She called off their engagement a week later, said it was like looking at Jason through frosted glass. What really convinced me something impossible had happened was when I snuck back to the clearing 2 weeks later, before the snow melted. The military equipment was gone, but they'd left markers in the ground, small metal posts arranged in a perfect circle. I brought my own compass, and just like Jason's notes described, it spun wildly near the center. But the truly terrifying part was what I found buried in the snow. Jason's watch, the GPS watch he never hiked without, still running, still keeping perfect time. Except according to its data log, it had recorded Jason walking for 11 days straight after he disappeared, covering over 300 miles, reaching elevations that don't exist on Crow Pass or anywhere in Alaska. The path on the GPS looked like someone had been walking through empty space, moving in 3 dimensions without regard for actual terrain. When I showed it to Jason, he looked at it for a long moment, then deleted all the data and handed it back to me. "Some trails aren't meant to be mapped," he said, and that was the last time he ever spoke about any of it. Jason quit his job as a physical therapist 6 months later, sold his house, and bought a small cabin near the Canadian border. He doesn't hike anymore, won't even drive past a trailhead. The few times I've visited, I've found notebooks filled with equations I don't understand, diagrams of dimensional folding, references to something he calls the between spaces. He started corresponding with other people who've had similar experiences. A woman from Norway, who vanished for 3 days in a fjord. a park ranger from Montana who lost a week in Glacier National Park, all of them found in places they shouldn't have been, all of them changed in ways they can't explain. They share coordinates, dates, atmospheric conditions, looking for patterns. Jason showed me a map once where he'd marked every incident he could verify. There are hundreds of them, clustered around specific geological features, many near old military testing sites. He believes the testing in the 60s didn't create weapons. It accidentally opened something, created thin spots in reality where people can slip through. The military knows about it, monitors these locations, but they can't close what they don't understand. The Crow Pass Trail reopened to the public this past summer, with a new route that bypasses that clearing entirely. They said it was for trail improvements, but I've seen the satellite images. There's a permanent installation there now, disguised as a weather station. Jason sent me one last email before he stopped using technology altogether, just coordinates and a date. The exact location and time he disappeared. When I checked the military records Amy had found, that date matched a test called Green Light Echo in 1967, described as a successful dimensional resonance experiment. The two missing researchers from that incident were found 3 weeks later in a hospital in Japan, with no memory of how they got there, speaking in equations for days before returning to normal. Neither of them ever fully recovered. I think about Jason every day, about who or what came back from that mountain. He seems content in his isolation, but sometimes when we talk on the phone, I hear him pause mid-sentence like he's listening to something far away, and he'll whisper, "They're walking again," before hanging up. I don't hike anymore either. I was 17 that summer, just another kid from Juneau trying to make the most of those endless daylight hours we get in July. My dad ran a small hardware store downtown, and I spent most weekdays helping him stock shelves and mix paint for tourists who'd decided their vacation rental needed a touch-up. Life was predictable, quiet even, until that Saturday when everything went sideways. My buddy Connor had just gotten his license, and his older brother's beat-up Chevy Silverado became our ticket to freedom. We'd been talking about checking out the old Perseverance mine entrance for weeks, ever since Connor's uncle mentioned it at a barbecue. The mine had been shut down since the 1920s, and locals always warned kids to stay away. Unstable ground, they said, old dynamite residue, toxic gases. But when you're 17 and invincible, those warnings just make it more appealing. There were 5 of us packed into that truck, me, Connor driving, his girlfriend Madison in the passenger seat, and my friends Lucas and Kai squeezed in the back with me. The road out there was rough, all gravel and potholes, winding through thick spruce forest for about 40 minutes before we reached the trailhead. Connor parked the truck in a small clearing where the old mining road used to continue, now just overgrown with Devil's Club and alder bushes. We grabbed our flashlights. Connor had these powerful LED ones he'd stolen from his dad's construction site, and started hiking up the trail. The entrance wasn't hard to find. It was this gaping black mouth in the mountainside, maybe 8 feet high and just as wide, with rusted metal tracks still visible leading inside. Someone had spray-painted "Keep Out" across a wooden barrier that had long since rotted and fallen to the side. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees as soon as we stepped inside, and our breath came out in little white puffs that danced in the flashlight beams. The tunnel walls were slick with moisture, and every 20 feet or so, thick wooden support beams crossed overhead, most of them black with rot and sagging in the middle. Connor kept making jokes about cave-ins to scare Madison, who punched his arm every time, but I could tell even he was getting nervous the deeper we went. About 200 feet in, the main tunnel branched into 3 different passages. Lucas wanted to split up, said we could cover more ground that way, but Kai shut that down immediately. Smart kid. We took the middle tunnel, which sloped downward at a gentle angle, and that's when we started seeing things that didn't belong. First, it was just some empty beer cans, probably from other kids who'd been brave or stupid enough to come down here. But then Madison's flashlight caught something metallic against the wall, and when we got closer, we realized it was a wristwatch, expensive looking, still ticking somehow despite the moisture. Connor picked it up and wiped the face clean with his shirt. It was a Tag Heuer, easily worth a couple grand. That should have been our first real warning sign, but we were too caught up in the adventure to think straight. Another 50 feet down the tunnel, Kai spotted something bundled up in an alcove to our left. It was a North Face jacket, bright red, barely dirty at all. Couldn't have been there more than a few weeks. Madison unzipped the pockets and found a wallet inside. Washington State driver's license for some guy named Bradley Thorne, 32 years old, credit card still there, $80 in cash. Lucas found another jacket nearby, this one black Columbia rain gear, and stuffed underneath it was a purple backpack with university textbooks inside. The name written in the front cover was Jennifer Huang, and there was a student ID from UW dated just 3 months ago. We stood there in the dancing flashlight beams, passing these items between us, and the joking stopped completely. These weren't artifacts from decades past. People had been here recently, and they'd left in such a hurry they didn't even grab their wallets. Madison wanted to leave right then, and honestly, I was with her. But Connor insisted we should go just a little further. Maybe find out what happened to these people. Kai suggested we take photos of the IDs and report it to the police later, which seemed reasonable enough. We continued down the tunnel, our footsteps echoing weirdly in the darkness, and the air grew thicker, mustier. About 100 feet further, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, maybe 30 feet across, with multiple passages branching off in different directions. Our flashlights swept across the space, revealing more abandoned items scattered around. Sleeping bags still rolled out, a camping stove with a half-cooked can of beans congealed on top, more backpacks, even a pair of hiking boots placed neatly side by side, as if someone had just taken them off for the night. Lucas counted at least 7 different sets of belongings, all from different people based on the variety of styles and sizes. The worst part was this notebook we found near one of the sleeping bags. Madison picked it up and started reading out loud, but her voice got quieter with each word. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Day 3. They come at night. Can hear them in the walls. Bradley thinks we should try to run, but Jennifer says they're watching the entrance. The scratching is getting louder. The entry cut off mid-sentence, and the next few pages had been torn out. Connor grabbed the notebook from Madison and flipped through it. More entries, different handwriting, like multiple people had been using it. One page just had the same word written over and over. Inside, 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 inside. Another had what looked like a crude map of the tunnel system with X marks at various points, and arrows pointing deeper into the mountain. At the bottom, someone had written in block letters, "They live in the deep shafts. Don't let them know you're here." My chest felt tight reading that, and I realized we'd all unconsciously moved closer together, our flashlight beams sweeping nervously across the dark tunnel mouths surrounding us. That's when we heard it, a sound that definitely wasn't made by any of us. It came from one of the deeper tunnels, this rhythmic scraping noise, like metal being dragged across rock. Then it stopped. We all held our breath, listening, and after maybe 10 seconds, we heard it again, but from a different tunnel. Closer. Connor whispered that we needed to get out immediately, and nobody argued. We started backing toward the tunnel we'd come from, trying to move quietly but quickly. The scraping sound came again, and this time it was followed by something else, a wet shuffling noise like someone walking through mud with bare feet. Madison grabbed Connor's arm so hard he dropped his flashlight, and it rolled across the floor, the beam spinning crazily before stopping with the light pointing directly down one of the dark passages. For just a second, I swear I saw something move back there, pulling back into the shadows. Not an animal, the movement was too deliberate, too calculated. It knew we were watching. We ran. There's no other way to describe it. We just turned and bolted back up the tunnel, our flashlights bouncing wildly, creating insane shadows on the walls. Behind us, that scraping sound multiplied, like whatever was making it had friends, and they were all moving now, Lucas tripped over something and went down hard, skinning his palms on the rough ground, but Kai and I hauled him up without even stopping. The branch in the tunnel where we'd made our first choice appeared ahead, and we veered left, sprinting toward that distant circle of daylight. Madison was crying, Connor was cursing under his breath, and I could hear my own ragged breathing echoing off the walls. The entrance seemed so far away, but we pushed harder, our legs burning, lungs screaming for air. When we finally burst out into the afternoon sunlight, we didn't stop running until we reached the truck, all of us piling against it, gasping and shaking. Connor fumbled for his keys, hands trembling so bad he dropped them twice before managing to get them out of his pocket. But something was wrong. The truck was listing to one side, and when we walked around to look, all 4 tires had been slashed, not just punctured, but absolutely shredded, with long gashes that went all the way through the rubber. The vinyl seats visible through the windows had been torn apart too, stuffing scattered everywhere like someone had gone at them with a knife in a rage. Connor tried his keys anyway, desperate, but they didn't even fit in the ignition anymore. Someone had jammed something into the lock and broken it off inside. The hood was popped open, and when Lucas checked, half the engine components were missing or destroyed. Hoses cut, battery cables severed. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone had methodically made sure we couldn't leave. Madison started hyperventilating, and Kai was trying to get signal on his phone, walking in circles with it held high above his head. But we all knew there was no coverage out here. We were 40 minutes from town by car, and that was assuming you didn't get lost on the unmarked Forest Service roads. The sun was already starting to sink toward the mountains, maybe 3 hours of daylight left at most. Connor kept saying we should start walking, follow the road back, but Madison pointed out what we were all thinking. Whoever did this to the truck was probably still around, watching, waiting. They knew we'd gone into the mine, knew we'd found those things, and they wanted to make sure we couldn't tell anyone. Lucas suggested we go back to the mine entrance, maybe find another way through the mountain, but that idea died the moment he said it out loud. We weren't going back in there. Not after what we'd heard. So we stood there by the ruined truck, 5 teenagers in the middle of nowhere, trying to figure out our next move while the forest around us grew darker and the shadows longer. That's when Kai noticed something carved into a tree near where Connor had parked. Fresh cuts in the bark, still weeping sap. It was a date, 08/03/2023. That was only 2 weeks ago. Below it was carved, B. Thorne was here. Bradley Thorne, the name from the Washington driver's license we'd found in the mine. We decided to stick together and start walking back toward town, staying on the main road. Connor grabbed a tire iron from the truck bed. Lucas found a broken piece of rebar on the ground, and the rest of us picked up whatever rocks we could carry. Pathetic weapons, but they made us feel slightly less helpless. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when we heard an engine in the distance, not coming from the direction of town, but from deeper in the forest, from one of the old logging roads that crisscrossed the area. We ducked into the trees and waited, hearts pounding, as an ancient Ford Bronco rumbled past, going slow, windows too dark to see inside. It stopped about 50 yards past where we were hiding, and the driver killed the engine. We held our breath, pressed against the wet moss and ferns, mosquitoes buzzing around our faces but nobody daring to swat them away. After what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes, the Bronco started up again and continued down the road toward the mine. That's when Connor made the call. We were going to cut through the forest, avoid the road entirely, and try to hit the main highway about 5 miles cross-country. It took us 6 hours of bushwhacking through Devil's Club and climbing over fallen logs to finally reach Route 7, and by then it was past midnight, our clothes torn, bodies covered in scratches and bug bites. A state trooper picked us up after about 10 minutes of walking along the highway. Connor's dad had called it in when we didn't come home. We told the trooper everything, showed him the photos Kai had taken of the IDs, explained about the truck. He radiated skepticism until he called it in and found out that Bradley Thorne and Jennifer Huang were both reported missing, along with 5 other people, all last seen in the Juneau area over the past 2 months. The next day, a whole team of cops and search and rescue went out to the mine. They found our truck just like we'd left it, found all the belongings in the mine, but no bodies, no sign of what had been making those sounds. The investigation went on for weeks, made the news all the way down in Seattle, but they never found those missing people. The mine entrance was sealed with concrete a month later, officially due to public safety concerns. Connor's family moved to Anchorage that winter. Madison and I broke up when she went to college in Oregon, and none of us really talk about it anymore. But sometimes I drive past the trailhead. They put up a gate now, heavy-duty steel with federal warning signs, and I wonder if those things, whatever they were, are still down there in the deep shafts, waiting, or if they found another way out. The wind was already picking up when we pulled into the narrow driveway that led to Kevin's cabin, about 40 miles outside Nome. It was late February 2024, and I'd been working as a dental hygienist in Anchorage for about 8 years at that point. Kevin was an old college friend who'd inherited this place from his grandfather and only used it during hunting season. When my ex-husband suddenly canceled his weekend with the kids and I'd already promised them we'd go somewhere special for winter break, Kevin offered his cabin without hesitation. My daughters, Olivia, who was 9, and Hannah, who had just turned 7, were bouncing in their seats excited about spending 4 days in what they called the Wilderness House. The GPS had given up about 20 minutes earlier, and I was following Kevin's handwritten directions, squinting through the increasingly heavy snowfall to spot the wooden marker he'd mentioned. I remember feeling genuinely grateful as we hauled our bags inside, the girls immediately claiming the loft bedroom, while I settled into the main floor's single bedroom. The cabin was bigger than I'd expected, with thick log walls and double-paned windows that Kevin had installed just last year. He'd left detailed notes everywhere: how to work the generator if the power went out, where the extra firewood was stacked under the tarp, which neighbor to call in case of emergency, though the closest one was about 3 miles away. The girls spent that first evening exploring every corner, fascinated by the mounted fish on the walls and the old snowshoes hanging by the stone fireplace. By the time I got them fed and into their pajamas, the weather report on the radio was calling for a significant storm system moving in faster than expected. I wasn't worried, though. We had enough food for a week, the propane tank was full, and the cabin felt solid and warm against the growing chaos outside. Around midnight, I woke up to complete silence, which somehow felt louder than any noise could have been. The power had gone out, and the darkness was so absolute I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, using its light to find the flashlight Kevin had left in the drawer. The generator was in a shed about 30 feet from the cabin, and there was no way I was going out there in the middle of the storm. I could hear the wind starting to pick up again, whistling through the trees with this low, constant moan that made the walls creak. I decided to check on the girls, tiptoeing up the narrow stairs to the loft. They were both sound asleep, Hannah curled up against her sister, their breathing steady and peaceful. I pulled their blanket up higher and was about to head back down when I heard it. 3 heavy, deliberate thuds against the back door, the one that faced the tree line. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a branch had fallen against the door, or some piece of loose equipment was being thrown around by the wind. But then it came again. 3 more impacts, evenly spaced, with enough force that I could hear something rattle in the kitchen below. There was a rhythm to it, a purposefulness that made every muscle in my body tense up. I stood there at the top of the stairs, gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles ached, waiting for it to happen again. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10, with just the wind and my own heartbeat filling the silence. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself I'd imagined the pattern, the knocking returned. But this time it was different. Instead of 3 knocks, there was a series of impacts, faster and more aggressive, like someone or something was trying to break through. The door was solid oak with a deadbolt and a chain lock that Kevin had insisted I use, but I could hear it straining against its frame with each blow. I crept down the stairs, each step seeming to scream under my weight despite my attempts to move silently. The kitchen was at the back of the cabin, and the door in question led out to a small covered porch that Kevin used for storing fishing gear in the summer. Through the small window next to the door, all I could see was swirling white and darkness beyond. The knocking had stopped again, replaced by an odd scratching sound, like fingernails. No, more like claws, dragging across the wood. I thought about calling 911, but my phone had no signal. Hadn't had one since we'd arrived. The satellite phone Kevin mentioned in his notes was in the shed with the generator. I stood there in the kitchen, the beam of my flashlight dancing across the walls as I tried to steady myself, when I noticed something that made my breath catch. The doorknob was turning, slowly, testing, first one way, then the other, with deliberate patience. I grabbed the biggest knife from the wooden block on the counter and backed away until I hit the far wall of the living room, keeping the flashlight trained on that door. The knob stopped moving, and for a moment everything went quiet except for the storm. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A long, drawn-out scraping along the entire height of the door, from top to bottom, like something was measuring it, testing its dimensions. Whatever was out there began pushing against the door, not knocking anymore but applying steady pressure. I could see the deadbolt holding, but the wood around it was starting to splinter. The frame itself was creaking, and tiny chips of paint were falling from where the door met the jamb. That's when Olivia called out from upstairs, her voice groggy and confused, asking what that noise was. I had to make a choice, stay and watch whatever was trying to get in or go to my children. I raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time, and found both girls sitting up in bed, Hannah now crying softly while Olivia had her arm around her. I told them there was just some debris hitting the cabin in the storm, that everything was fine, but we were going to play a game where we all stayed very quiet in the bathroom. It was the only room in the cabin without windows, just a small ventilation fan in the ceiling. I grabbed all the blankets and pillows I could carry, brought them into the bathroom, and made a nest in the bathtub for the girls. The pounding downstairs had resumed, now accompanied by what sounded like multiple points of impact, as if more than one thing was trying to force entry. I could hear wood splintering, larger pieces now, and something that sounded like the kitchen chairs being knocked over. I locked the bathroom door, pushed the heavy oak cabinet against it, and sat on the floor with my back pressed against the cabinet, the knife still clutched in my right hand. The girls were asking questions. Why were we in the bathroom? What was that sound? When could we go back to bed? And I had to keep making up stories while listening to the destruction happening below us. The noises went on for what must have been an hour, maybe more. Sometimes it would stop completely for 10 or 15 minutes, and just when I'd start to hope it was over, it would begin again with renewed violence. At some point I heard glass breaking. The kitchen window, I thought. And then heavy footsteps, or what sounded like footsteps but with a strange dragging quality, as if something was being pulled across the floor. The ceiling beneath us creaked with the weight of whatever was moving through the cabin. I could track its movement through the living room, into my bedroom, then back to the kitchen. It was searching for something, or someone. The girls had finally fallen asleep in the tub, exhausted from fear they didn't fully understand, and I sat there in the dark, the flashlight off to preserve battery, listening to our cabin being systematically ransacked. Then came the worst part. The footsteps were on the stairs. Each step was deliberate, heavy, and accompanied by that dragging sound, like something wet and heavy was being pulled up with each movement. The stairs in Kevin's cabin were old and loud. I knew exactly which step it was on by the specific creaks and groans. 4th step, 5th step, 6th. There were 12 steps total. I pressed harder against the cabinet, my legs braced against the opposite wall, ready to fight if whatever it was managed to get through. The hallway outside the bathroom went silent after the 12th step. I could feel it out there, waiting, listening maybe. Then I heard breathing, deep ragged breathing that seemed to come from a much larger chest than any person should have. It was right outside the door. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then nothing. The breathing continued for several minutes, So close I swear I could feel the door warming up from its presence on the other side. A new sound started, sniffing, like a dog but deeper, more guttural. It was smelling around the door frame, particularly near the bottom where the gap was slightly wider. I held my breath, terrified that it could somehow smell our fear, smell us hiding just feet away. Hannah stirred in the tub, making a small whimpering sound in her sleep, and instantly the sniffing stopped. There was a low rumble, not quite a growl, but something similar, something that made the door vibrate slightly. Then, without warning, something slammed into the door with tremendous force. The cabinet jumped, sliding an inch despite my weight against it. Another impact, and another. The wood was starting to crack. I could see splinters forming in the door panel through the gap above the cabinet. Whatever was out there wasn't just strong. It was determined. Between impacts, I could hear it making these sounds. Not quite human, not quite animal, but something caught horribly between the two. It was trying to speak, or at least that's what it sounded like. These garbled, wet attempts at words that never quite formed into anything recognizable. Just when I thought the door would give way completely, everything stopped. The breathing, the impacts, even the wind outside seemed to pause. I stayed pressed against that cabinet for another 2 hours, maybe 3, until the first pale light of dawn started filtering through the ventilation fan above us. Only when I could clearly see the girls' faces in the natural light did I dare to slowly, carefully, slide the cabinet away from the door. I didn't open it right away. I pressed my ear against it, listening for any sign of movement outside. Nothing. Finally, with the knife raised and ready, I unlocked the door and pushed it open just a crack. The hallway was destroyed. Long gouges in the walls at about chest height, the carpet torn into strips, and a smell like rotting meat mixed with wet dog that made me gag. But whatever had been there was gone. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot while the girls stayed locked in the bathroom. The back door was hanging off its hinges, the frame completely shattered, wood splinters scattered across the kitchen floor like broken teeth. The moment I saw our car was still intact and the keys were still in my pocket, I ran back upstairs, wrapped the girls in their blankets without explaining anything, and carried them one at a time to the car. I didn't pack a single thing, didn't even grab our phones or wallets. I just needed to get us away from that place. As I was backing out of the driveway, Olivia, now fully awake, pointed toward the tree line and asked why there were such big marks in the snow. I looked where she was pointing and saw them. Deep drag marks like something massive had been pulled from our back door into the forest, disappearing between the dark pines. The tracks were at least 3 feet wide, pressed deep into the snow, and they went on as far as I could see into the woods. We drove straight through to Anchorage, 8 hours without stopping except for gas, and I never told Kevin the real reason why his back door needed to be replaced. I just sent him money for the repairs and said a bear had tried to get in during the storm. To this day, I don't know what came to that cabin, what wanted so desperately to get inside. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and hear any unexpected sound, I remember that breathing outside the bathroom door, those wet, malformed attempts at speech, and I pull my own daughters a little closer. Everyone always tells you to trust your gut when something doesn't feel right, but nobody really prepares you for that moment when your instincts might be the only thing standing between you and something terrible. I was 24, fresh out of nursing school, and had just landed my first real job at a hospital in Anchorage. It was late March 2014, and I'd been driving that same stretch of the Seward Highway twice a week to visit my boyfriend who lived down in Kenai. The drive usually took about 3 hours, and I'd gotten comfortable enough with it that I'd started making the trip at night after my shifts ended, figuring the roads would be emptier and I could make better time. That particular Friday, I'd pulled a double shift and didn't get out until almost 11 p.m., but I was determined to make it down for the weekend like I'd promised. The Seward Highway at night is something else entirely. Just you, the mountains on one side, the water on the other, and this endless ribbon of asphalt that seems to swallow up your headlights. I'd been driving for about an hour when I saw the car up ahead, maybe a quarter mile, with its hazard lights blinking in this steady rhythm that cut through the darkness. It was an older sedan, dark blue or maybe black, pulled off to the side but not completely. The back end was still sticking out into the shoulder. My first thought was that someone had broken down, and being a nurse, I felt this automatic pull to stop and help. I started easing off the gas, moving into the left lane to give them room, already mentally running through what emergency supplies I had in my trunk. But as I got closer, maybe 100 feet away, my high beam swept across the scene and I saw something that made every muscle in my body go rigid. There was someone crouched down behind the car, pressed against the back bumper like they were trying to stay hidden from anyone approaching. They weren't checking a tire or looking at the engine. They were deliberately positioned to be invisible until you got close enough that stopping would put you right next to them. The person was wearing all black, including what looked like a ski mask, and they had their head turned watching my approach while staying perfectly still in that unnatural crouch. In that split second, my brain processed a dozen wrong details. No tools scattered around, no jack visible. The hood wasn't even popped, and most disturbing of all, I could see through the back window that there was someone else sitting in the driver's seat. Just sitting there, not moving, not looking back for help. My foot found the gas pedal before I even made the conscious decision, and I swerved back into my lane, accelerating past that car like my life depended on it. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it over the engine, and I kept checking my rearview mirror, trying to process what I'd just seen. The hazard lights were still blinking behind me, growing smaller, and for a moment I thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe there was some explanation I hadn't considered. Then I saw headlights flip on behind me, not from the car that had been stopped, but from somewhere further back where the road curved, like another vehicle had been waiting in the darkness with its lights off. The headlights were gaining on me fast, much faster than anyone should be driving on that winding highway, and within 30 seconds they were right on my tail, so close their high beams lit up my entire interior like daylight. I was already doing 70 in a 55 zone, my little Toyota Corolla shaking from the speed, but they stayed glued to my bumper, close enough that I couldn't even see their hood in my mirror. I tried everything I could think of, tapping my brakes to signal them to back off, speeding up to 80 even though the curves made me feel like I might flip, even putting on my hazards thinking maybe they'd realize I was in distress. Nothing worked. They matched every move, and when I slowed down for a particularly sharp turn near Beluga Point, they actually bumped me. Not hard enough to send me off the road, but a deliberate tap that sent my car lurching forward and made me bite down so hard on my tongue I tasted blood. That's when I knew this wasn't road rage or some drunk driver. They were trying to force me to stop. My phone was in my purse on the passenger floor where it had fallen, and reaching for it would mean taking my eyes off the road while going nearly 90 miles per hour. The highway was completely empty except for us, no other headlights in either direction, and the pull-offs I was flying past were just patches of darkness that looked more like traps than escape routes. Then they hit me again, harder this time, and my car fishtailed toward the guardrail that was the only thing between me and a drop straight into Turnagain Arm. I managed to correct it, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached, and that's when I remembered something from a self-defense class I'd taken in college. If someone's following you, drive to a police station or somewhere public. Never go home. Never stop in isolation. But the nearest town was still 40 miles away, and I didn't know if I had 40 miles worth of luck left. The car behind me was swerving now, trying to pull alongside me, and I could see it was a large SUV, maybe a Tahoe or something similar, with tinted windows so dark I couldn't make out anything inside. Every time they got close to pulling even with me, I'd swerve toward them, forcing them to fall back or risk hitting the mountain wall, but I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer. Just when I thought I was going to either crash or get run off the road, I saw a pinprick of light ahead. The Sunrise Inn, this little 24-hour gas station and diner combo that serviced truckers heading through. It was maybe 2 miles away, and I started flashing my high beams frantically, honking my horn in long, desperate blasts, praying someone would see me coming. The SUV must have noticed where I was heading because they rammed me again, harder than before, sending my back end sliding sideways. I felt the tires lose grip for a terrifying second before they caught asphalt again, and I jerked the wheel hard right, aiming for the exit ramp like my life depended on it, which it probably did. The SUV tried to follow but took the turn too fast and too wide, their back end swinging out, and that gave me just enough time to rocket into the gas station parking lot, laying on my horn the entire way. I skidded to a stop right in front of the glass doors where I could see the clerk inside, a heavy-set woman with gray hair who looked up startled from her magazine. I practically fell out of my car, leaving it running, doors open, and ran inside screaming for her to call 911. The SUV had pulled into the far end of the parking lot, just sitting there with its engine running, those dark windows reflecting the station's fluorescent lights. The clerk, bless her soul, didn't ask questions. She grabbed the phone and started dialing while pulling a baseball bat from behind the counter. We watched through the windows as the SUV sat there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds, then slowly reversed and pulled back onto the highway, heading back the direction we'd come from. I was shaking so badly the clerk had to help me to a chair, and when the state troopers arrived 15 minutes later, I could barely get the words out to explain what had happened. The troopers took my statement and went back to check on that stranded vehicle I'd described. When they returned an hour later, their faces told me everything before they even spoke. They'd found the sedan abandoned, no hazard lights, no people, but there were fresh tire marks in the gravel, suggesting multiple vehicles had been parked there recently. The car had been reported stolen from Anchorage 2 days earlier, and there were rope fibers on the back seat and zip ties scattered on the floor. One of the troopers, a younger guy named Officer Brennan, told me quietly that there had been 3 similar incidents in the past month. Women traveling alone on that stretch of highway who'd reported being followed aggressively after passing what looked like a breakdown. 2 of them hadn't been as lucky as me. One had been forced off the road near Bird Creek and managed to lock herself in her car until help arrived, and the other, they'd found her car abandoned 20 miles from where she'd called 911, her phone still playing the recorded line. The clerk, whose name was Dottie, made me coffee with extra sugar and wouldn't let me leave until my boyfriend arrived to follow me the rest of the way. She told me she'd been working that station for 12 years and had seen enough to know when someone's guardian angel was working overtime. While we waited, she showed me the security footage from her cameras. You could see the SUV pulling in, and even though the quality was grainy, you could make out that there were at least 2 people in the front seats. What made my stomach turn was when she rewound it further and showed me that same SUV had driven past the station heading north about 2 hours before I'd arrived, moving slow like they were scouting. They'd been out there hunting, and I'd almost driven right into their trap. The investigation went on for weeks, but they never caught anyone. The SUV was found burned out in a gravel pit near Girdwood 3 days later, stripped of plates and VIN numbers. The police theorized it was a team, probably 3 or 4 people, using the breakdown scenario to target women traveling alone at night. They'd have one person hide behind the bait car to grab anyone who stopped, while others waited in vehicles nearby to block escape routes. The detective assigned to my case said I'd done everything right, trusting my instincts, not stopping, getting to a public place. But what really saved me was probably that I'd seen the person hiding before I'd slowed down enough for the trap to spring. If I'd gotten out to help, or even just stopped to ask if they needed assistance through my window, I would have been another missing person case on a highway that already had too many. I never drove that road at night again. Actually, I ended up breaking up with my boyfriend 2 months later and took a job in Colorado, partially because I couldn't shake the feeling every time I saw a car with hazard lights. The detective called me about 6 months after I'd moved to tell me they'd arrested a group matching the description in connection with an attempted kidnapping near Fairbanks. But the case fell apart when witnesses couldn't make positive identifications. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd left work 5 minutes earlier or later that night, if I'd taken a different route, if my headlights hadn't caught that figure crouched in the darkness at just the right angle. Dottie was right about guardian angels, but I know the real reason I'm able to write this today is because something deep in my brain, some primitive survival instinct, recognized a predator lying in wait and refused to let me become prey. Trust that feeling. It's there for a reason, and it might be the only warning you get. "40 miles south of Adigan Pass, my Peterbilt went sideways on black ice and buried itself in a snowbank deeper than I am tall. I was 38, hauling equipment for North Star Logistics like I'd done for 12 years, making those long runs from Anchorage to Prudhoe Bay. Just another Tuesday in January, or at least that's what it was supposed to be. Living alone meant nobody would miss me for days, just my cat back home, probably already plotting revenge for the automatic feeder running empty. The weather service had promised clear skies until midnight, maybe some light flurries, nothing serious. But around 4 p.m., the horizon turned into this thick gray curtain moving toward me fast, like someone was pulling a blanket over the whole world. Within minutes, the temperature gauge on my dash dropped 15 degrees, and these fat snowflakes started hitting my windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. The wind hit like a freight train, slamming into the side of my trailer so hard I had to fight the wheel just to stay in my lane. Visibility went from miles to yards to absolutely nothing. Just this swirling chaos of white that made it impossible to tell where the road ended and the tundra began. I dropped down through the gears, crawling along at maybe 10 miles per hour, searching for any landmark that would tell me where I was. The mile markers had vanished. The pipeline that usually ran parallel to the highway was gone. Even the reflective posts along the shoulder had disappeared into the storm. Then came that moment every trucker dreads. The steering went weightless in my hands. That floating feeling that means you've lost traction completely. The whole rig started sliding sideways in this eerily quiet drift, the trailer pushing me toward what I thought was the shoulder, but turned out to be a drainage ditch packed with snow from the last storm. 18 wheels and 40 tons of steel just glided off the road like a toy, settling into that ditch with a soft crunch that left me tilted at a 20-degree angle, completely stuck. The engine was still running, but I knew I wasn't going anywhere without a heavy wrecker, and nothing was moving on that highway until the storm passed. I tried my phone. No signal, which was normal for that stretch even on good days. The CB radio just gave me static, nobody else stupid enough to be out in this mess. My fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, enough to keep the heater running for maybe 30 hours if I was careful, but these storms could last days. The temperature outside was already -20 and dropping fast. That's when I remembered the maintenance shed. There was one about a 1/4 mile back. I'd passed it right before the weather went to hell. These little shacks dot the whole highway, places where the road crews store salt and tools, sometimes hole up during storms. It meant leaving the truck, which goes against everything they teach you, but staying put meant burning through my fuel and possibly freezing to death if the storm outlasted my diesel. I grabbed my emergency bag, flashlight, flares, some energy bars, water bottles that were already starting to slush up, and wrapped myself in every layer I had. The moment I opened the door, the wind tried to rip it off the hinges. The cold hit like a physical thing, stealing my breath and making my eyes water instantly. Walking in that storm was like being underwater and on fire at the same time. I couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead. The snow was up to my knees, and the wind kept trying to knock me flat. I followed the slope of the ditch back up to the road, then tried to stay on what I hoped was the shoulder, using the wind direction to keep myself oriented. What should have been a 5-minute walk took almost 20, and by the time I spotted the dark shape of the shed through the storm, I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, even through my insulated gloves. The door was secured with a padlock, but the hasp was so rusted that 3 kicks broke it free. I practically fell inside, slamming the door behind me and collapsing against it, just grateful to be out of that screaming wind. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a space about 12 feet by 8 feet, walls made of corrugated metal that rattled with every gust. There were shelves along one wall holding bags of road salt, a few rusty shovels, and a broken spreader. But what caught my attention was the corner near the back. Someone had made themselves comfortable there. A thick moving blanket was spread on the floor, the kind we use to protect furniture, still relatively clean. Next to it sat a neat pyramid of empty soup cans, maybe 15 or 20 of them. Labels faded but readable. Campbell's, Progresso, brands you'd find at any grocery store. A camping lantern sat on an overturned bucket, and beside it, a small pile of paperback books, their pages swollen with moisture. Someone had been living here, or at least staying here regularly. The organization of it all made me uneasy. This wasn't some emergency shelter situation like mine. This was deliberate, planned. I moved closer to examine the makeshift living space, and that's when I noticed the walls. At first, I thought it was just scratches in the metal, maybe from equipment being moved around. But when I aimed my flashlight directly at them, I could see they were deliberate marks carved into the corrugated ridges. Numbers, mostly. Dates going back about 2 months, starting in early December. Next to each date were tally marks, sometimes just 1 or 2, sometimes up to 7 or 8. But it was what was carved between the dates that made me step back. Crude drawings of vehicles, trucks, cars, what looked like an SUV, each one with an X scratched through it. Below the vehicles were numbers, 1, 2, 1, 3, 2. At the bottom of all this, carved deeper than the rest, were 3 words that didn't make sense. They don't stop. My first thought was that whoever stayed here was tracking the traffic, maybe counting days until rescue. But why cross out the vehicles? And what did those other numbers mean? The storm outside was getting worse, the whole shed shaking like it might tear loose from its foundation. I figured I'd be stuck here for hours, maybe until morning, so I started exploring more carefully. Behind the bags of salt, I found a Coleman cooler, the old metal kind from the 70s. Inside were more empty cans, but also something that made my chest tighten: car keys. 5 different sets, each on different keychains. A fuzzy dice, a bottle opener shaped like a fish, a worn rabbit's foot, a small LED light, and a plastic tag from a rental company. These weren't from the same person. I dug deeper and found wallets, 3 of them, all with driver's licenses still inside. Gregory Ash from Wiseman, 42 years old. Bethany Carver from Fairbanks, 28. Robert Lang from Deadhorse, 51. The licenses were all current, none expired. There was cash in the wallets too, credit cards, family photos. Gregory had a picture of 2 kids in baseball uniforms. Bethany had one of herself with an older woman who looked like her mother. These people wouldn't just leave this stuff behind. I was still processing what I'd found when I heard something that wasn't the wind. A metallic scraping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from outside. Through a small ventilation grate near the ceiling, I could barely make out a shape moving through the storm. Tall, hunched forward against the wind, dragging something behind it. The scraping stopped right outside the door. Then came 3 knocks, evenly spaced, patient. Not the frantic pounding of someone desperate for shelter, but calm, measured, like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I held my breath, flashlight off, pressing myself against the far wall. The knocks came again, same pattern, same patience. Then a voice muffled by the wind but clear enough. "I know you're in there, same as the others were." The voice had this flat quality to it, no emotion, like someone reading from a script. "Your truck's not going anywhere, not in this storm, not ever really." A pause, then. The others thought they could wait it out too. Thought someone would come looking. But the highway's closed now. Won't open for days, maybe weeks. The door handle rattled, tested from outside. I gripped one of the rusty shovels, knowing how useless it would be if that door opened. "Gregory lasted 6 days," the voice continued, conversational now, like we were old friends catching up. Kept talking about his kids, showing their pictures to anyone who'd look. Bethany made it 4. She tried to run on day 3, made it about 100 yards before the cold got her. Had to drag her back. The scraping sound returned, something heavy being repositioned outside the door. Robert was smart, tried to bargain. Said he had money, connections in the oil companies, but money doesn't mean much out here. The voice got closer to the door, maybe pressed right against it. I've been watching your truck for the last hour. Peterbilt, nice rig, North Star logo on the door. They'll report you missing eventually, but by then the storm will have covered everything. Another accident on the Dalton. Happens every winter. My mouth was completely dry, my legs shaking as I tried to process what I was hearing. This person had killed at least 3 people, maybe more based on those tallies on the wall. Here's what happens now, the voice said, still maintaining that eerily calm tone. You can open this door and we can talk about your options. Or you can stay in there and I'll wait. I'm very good at waiting. I've got a place about half a mile from here, nice and warm. Generator, food, everything I need. You've got what, maybe a few energy bars? That shed gets down to -40 at night. The salt bags don't make very good insulation. The handle rattled again, harder this time. Oh, and don't bother with the ventilation grate. Already sealed it from outside while you were looking through those wallets. Carbon monoxide from that lantern will build up pretty quick in a space that small. I looked up at the grate and could see something dark pressed against it from outside. Cloth or plastic, I couldn't tell. The camping lantern on the bucket wasn't lit, but if I needed heat, if I tried to use it. 20 minutes, the voice said. That's how long I'll give you to think about it. Then I'm going to start making this uncomfortable. The scraping sound moved away from the door, followed by footsteps that quickly disappeared into the howling wind. My mind was racing through options, all of them bad. The wallets in my hands belonged to people who'd faced this same choice and were now presumably dead. But something about the whole setup bothered me. If this guy was such a successful predator, why leave evidence in the shed? Why let me find the wallets and keys? Then I remembered the carvings. They don't stop. Maybe those weren't his victim's words. Maybe they were his frustration. The numbers under each vehicle suddenly made sense. Passengers. He'd tried to get vehicles to stop, but they kept driving. The storm was his opportunity, forcing people off the road. I dug through my emergency bag with shaking fingers, found the flares. 4 of them. Not much, but maybe enough. I also had my knife, a folding buck my father gave me 20 years ago. The shed had those bags of road salt, the shovels, some chains hanging on the wall. I grabbed the heaviest chain, about 6 feet of it, and wrapped one end around my left hand. The door opened outward. I remembered fighting the wind to close it. If I could time it right when he came back. 15 minutes later, I heard the scraping again. Closer, stopping about 10 feet from the door. Time's up, friend. Winter's not getting any warmer. Then came a sound that made my gut clench. Liquid splashing against the metal walls. The sharp smell of gasoline cutting through the cold air. He was dousing the shed. Last chance to come out and talk, he called. Or we can do this the hard way. I knew I had seconds to decide. I lit all 4 flares at once, the red light filling the shed with hellish shadows, sulfur smoke already thick in the sealed space. Then I kicked the door open with everything I had. The wind caught it, slamming it wide, and I burst out into the storm, flares in one hand, chain swinging in the other. The man stumbled backward, caught off guard. He was shorter than I'd expected, wearing a Park Service uniform that was clearly stolen, too big for his frame. His face was gaunt, weathered, with pale blue eyes that looked completely hollow. He had a jerry can in one hand, a flare gun in the other. I threw 2 of my flares at him, the wind sending them spinning like fiery pinwheels. He raised his arm to block them, and I swung the chain, catching his wrist. The flare gun went off, the projectile shooting into the storm. We both went down in the snow, rolling and fighting for control. The fuel gauge needle was kissing empty when I finally spotted the turnoff for Copper Falls, a settlement so small it wasn't even marked on the GPS mounted to my dashboard. August 2013, middle of nowhere, Alaska. And there I was in my old Chevy Silverado, hauling mining equipment like I'd been doing for the past 2 years. 32 years old, 6 months out from a divorce that left me with weekend visitation rights and a mountain of legal bills. but at least the job paid enough to keep my daughter Claire in her private school back in Anchorage. The long supply runs between our main office and the remote sites usually gave me time to clear my head. Just me and the road, and maybe a podcast or two to break up the monotony. That day, though, I'd been driving for 8 hours straight, and with the next gas station still 40 miles out according to my notes, Copper Falls was my only option. An old-timer at a truck stop had mentioned the place months ago, said they sold diesel cheap if you didn't mind the 3-mile detour down a gravel road that would rattle your teeth loose. The settlement appeared suddenly after a final bend in the road. Maybe 20 buildings clustered in a clearing carved out of dense spruce forest. A general store with 2 ancient pumps out front, a handful of weathered houses with metal roofs, a small white church with a crooked steeple, and a one-room schoolhouse that looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint since the Reagan administration. The kind of place where everybody's grandfather had known everybody else's grandfather, where the biggest news was probably who caught the largest salmon last season. But the moment I rolled into what passed for Main Street, something made me ease off the gas pedal. It was 2 p.m. on a Monday, bright sunshine, perfect weather, yet the place had this weight to it, like the air was thicker somehow. Every house I passed had its front door hanging open, not wide open like they'd been abandoned in a hurry, but half open, the way you'd leave it if you were just stepping out to grab something from your truck and coming right back. Through those dark doorways, I could glimpse the ordinary details of interrupted lives, a TV still glowing in one living room, laundry hanging motionless on a back porch, a dog's water bowl sitting on a front step with the water still fresh and clear. I pulled up to the gas pumps, the crunch of gravel under my tires impossibly loud in all that quiet. No other vehicles anywhere, not even an old pickup or four-wheeler parked beside the houses. The credit card reader on the pump was wrapped in plastic with a sun-faded "See Attendant" sign taped to it, so I walked toward the store's entrance, my work boots echoing on the wooden steps. The door was propped open with a chunk of firewood, and inside I could hear the electric hum of refrigerators still running. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding strange and flat, like the building was swallowing the sound. The lights were on, the cash register drawer hanging open with bills still in it. 20s, 10s, 5s, all neatly arranged in their slots. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a paper plate next to the register, one bite missing from the corner, the exposed bread still soft. Not dried out, not stale. Fresh, like someone had set it down minutes ago. The silence in that store was different from regular quiet. It had weight to it, presence, like when you're in a room and you know someone's standing right behind you even though you haven't turned around yet. I grabbed a 20 from my wallet and left it on the counter, then walked back outside to pump my own gas. The numbers on the old analog display clicked up slowly, each one unnaturally loud, and I kept scanning the empty street, the dark windows of the houses, waiting to see someone, anyone, step out and ask what I was doing. Nobody came. When I walked around the side of the store to find the diesel pump, I noticed the generator shed, door wide open, motor still running smooth and steady. Beyond that, a house with its kitchen window facing the store, and through the glass I could see a table set for dinner. 4 plates, silverware laid out neat, food still on them. Mashed potatoes with a pat of butter melting in the center, green beans that looked crisp, some kind of meat with gravy. Steam wasn't rising from the food anymore, but it hadn't congealed either, hadn't taken on that dull look that food gets when it's been sitting out too long. My first thought was maybe a gas leak, something that would make everyone evacuate fast. But there was no smell, no sirens, no emergency vehicles. I actually walked into that house, the door was open anyway, and checked the stove. Electric, turned off, everything normal. The refrigerator hummed, photos of kids and grandkids stuck to it with magnets from Fairbanks and Nome. A calendar on the wall marked with birthdays and Ruth's dentist appointment in blue pen for the following week. In the living room, a pair of reading glasses rested on the arm of a recliner, right next to a coffee mug that was still warm to the touch. Not hot, but warm, like someone had been sipping it maybe 20 minutes ago. A crossword puzzle book lay open on the side table, half completed. the pen balanced in the crease between pages. The TV was muted but turned to a news channel, the ticker at the bottom scrolling through weather updates and sports scores from that very day. I must have checked 6 or 7 houses, and they were all the same story. Lives paused mid-action, like someone had hit a cosmic pause button on the entire settlement. In one house, a bathtub was filled with water, still barely warm, bubbles clinging to the edges, a towel laid out on the toilet seat. In another, a sewing machine sat with fabric still under the needle, a straight line of stitches stopping abruptly mid-seam. The church was the strangest. Hymnals open on the pews, the piano bench pushed back like someone had stood up in the middle of playing, sheet music for Amazing Grace still propped up on the stand. But no purses, no car keys left behind, no cell phones forgotten on counters. Whatever had happened, people had taken those things with them. By 4 p.m., I'd covered the whole settlement, calling out until my throat was raw, and the only sound that came back was my own echo and the steady hum of all those still running appliances. I decided to wait in my truck until dark. Maybe someone would come back. Maybe there was some local emergency I didn't know about, a drill or something. The sun doesn't set quickly in Alaska during August. It's this long, drawn-out process that turns everything golden, then orange, then deep purple. I sat in my truck parked in front of the general store, windows cracked, eating one of my packed sandwiches even though my appetite was completely gone. Around 8 p.m., with the light finally starting to fade properly, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. My heart jumped, but when I turned to look, nothing. Just those open doorways, darker now, like mouths. Then I saw it again. A curtain in one of the houses, shifting. Not like wind was moving it, but like someone had brushed past it on the other side. I got out of my truck, walked halfway to that house, calling out, "I'm not here to cause trouble, just needed gas. If someone's there, please just let me know you're okay." Nothing, but as I stood there in the middle of that dirt road, I became aware of a sound. Not quite voices, not quite wind. Like whispering, but without words, just the rhythm and cadence of whispered conversation, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I got back in my truck immediately, locked the doors, and started the engine. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to leave. Just drive. Worry about explanations later. But it was getting dark. The road out was rough, and I'd seen no other vehicles for hours. If I broke down or went off the road, I'd be completely stranded. Plus, and I know this sounds insane, but I felt like I needed to know. My whole life I'd been the person who reads the last page of a book first, who looks up movie spoilers before watching. I couldn't just drive away from this mystery. So I stayed, engine running, heater on low, watching those dark doorways as the last of the sunlight disappeared. That's when the whispering got louder. Still no words I could make out, but definitely louder, more insistent, like multiple conversations happening just outside the range of understanding. I turned on my high beams, sweeping them across the street, and for just a second, I swear, I saw shapes. Not people exactly, but suggestions of people, like the space where people should be was somehow visible, outlined in the way dust motes moved through the air. My phone had no signal. Hadn't since I'd turned off the main highway, but I tried calling 911 anyway. Nothing. The radio in my truck just gave me static on every station, even the emergency broadcast frequency. Around 10 p.m., the whispering changed. It became more organized, more like a conversation where different voices were taking turns, rising and falling in what almost sounded like questions and answers. I could feel it as much as hear it, vibrating through the metal of my truck, making my teeth ache. I grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy mag lights that doubles as a weapon if needed, and stepped out again. The moment my feet hit the ground, the whispering stopped. Complete silence, even more absolute than before. I walked to the nearest house, pushed the door fully open with the flashlight, and stepped inside. The TV was still on, still muted, but now showing static. The crossword puzzle I'd seen earlier had been moved, still on the table but closed, the pen placed neatly on top. That's when I heard footsteps above me, on the second floor. Slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to make noise but failing. The ceiling creaked with each step, following a path from what must have been a bedroom toward the stairs. I stood at the bottom of those stairs, flashlight beam pointing up into the darkness, and called out one more time, "I know someone's up there. I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just want to understand what's happening." The footsteps stopped directly at the top of the stairs. I could feel someone there, the weight of their presence, the held breath, the anticipation. But my flashlight beam showed nothing but an empty hallway, a runner carpet with a faded rose pattern, family photos on the walls. Then, and I'll remember this until the day I die, I heard my daughter's voice. Clear as day, coming from that empty hallway. "Mommy, why did you leave us?" But Claire was hundreds of miles away in Anchorage, safe with her father, and she'd never called me Mommy. It had always been Mom, or when she was really little, Mama. I ran, not walked, not backed away carefully. I ran like my life depended on it, crashed through that front door, stumbled to my truck, and peeled out of there so fast my tires threw gravel against the storefronts. In my rearview mirror, illuminated by my taillights, I saw them. People, dozens of them, standing in the middle of the street where seconds before there had been nothing. They weren't moving, weren't waving, just standing there watching me leave. Men, women, children, all perfectly still, all perfectly normal looking except for the fact that they hadn't been there 10 seconds ago. I drove those 3 miles of gravel road faster than was safe, my truck fishtailing around corners, branches scraping against the sides. When I finally hit the main highway, I didn't stop until I reached the next town, nearly 50 miles away. I pulled into a 24-hour diner, my legs shaking so bad I could barely walk, and asked the waitress if she'd heard anything about Copper Falls, any emergency, any evacuation. She looked at me like I'd asked her about Atlantis. "Honey," she said, refilling my coffee cup for the 3rd time, "there's no place called Copper Falls around here. I've lived in this area 40 years. I drove back the next morning. I know that sounds crazy, but I had to. I found the spot where I'd turned off, or where I thought I had. But there was no road. No worn path, no wooden sign, nothing. Just unbroken forest, trees that looked like they'd been growing undisturbed for decades. I spent 3 hours walking through those woods with GPS, looking for any trace of that settlement. I found nothing. Not a foundation, not a power line, not even a clearing where buildings might have stood. When I got back to Anchorage, I checked every map, every record I could find. No Copper Falls, no record of it ever existing. The old-timer who'd first told me about it? The other truckers at that stop said he'd died 5 years before I claimed to have met him. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving those long, empty stretches, I hear that whispering again, just at the edge of my hearing. And I push the accelerator a little harder and don't look in my mirrors until I see city lights again. I'd been working a construction job back then, saving up for classes, and weekends were my escape. My friend Marcus had this old pickup, and he suggested we drive out to Big Lake for a couple of nights with a few others. There were 5 of us in total. Marcus, his cousin Drew, my coworker Lena, her friend Sarah, and me. We were all in our early 20s, restless and craving something different from the usual nights of cheap beer and crowded bars. The idea of camping near the lake sounded like freedom, and we packed light. Too light in hindsight. A couple of tents, sleeping bags, and a cooler stuffed with gas station food. The drive took longer than planned because Marcus insisted on shortcut trails that were more mud than road. By the time we got close to the lake, the sky was already bruised with fading light. Pines surrounded us in every direction, so thick it felt like we were threading a needle through endless green walls. When we finally stopped, the ground was uneven and damp, but Marcus grinned like he'd just discovered gold. We set up camp, laughing, swatting mosquitoes, arguing over who forgot extra matches. The place had this eerie silence between our voices, like the forest itself was holding its breath. On the second afternoon, while searching for dry wood, Drew spotted a path that looked barely walked. Curiosity got the better of us, and we followed it. The trail twisted deeper into the woods until we stumbled across a weathered hunting cabin, half swallowed by moss and shadow. The windows were cracked, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and the roof sagged as if it had given up years ago. Lena muttered that it looked like a set from a horror film, but Marcus was already pushing the door open. The hinges groaned loud enough to wake the dead. Inside, the air was thick, sour, and colder than outside. The first thing I noticed was a workbench cluttered with tools. They weren't rusty the way you'd expect in a place this neglected. Some were sharpened clean, others stained dark in ways I didn't want to admit were blood. A pile of hides lay in the corner, fox maybe or something larger, stacked like someone had left in the middle of a job. Lena whispered that it had to be poachers, and none of us laughed at her nervous tone. In the dust, there were boot prints fresh enough to smudge when Drew brushed his hand across them. That was the moment I felt a knot settle in my chest. Whoever had used this cabin hadn't abandoned it. We didn't linger long inside the cabin, but it was enough to sour the mood. On the way back to camp, none of us spoke much except Marcus, who kept brushing it off like it was just some old hunter's shed. But Sarah kept glancing behind us, and Drew muttered that the boot prints looked too fresh to ignore. By the time we reached our tents, the sun was bleeding into the horizon, the kind of light that makes everything sharp and unreal. I tried to shake the unease by focusing on building a bigger fire, but the silence between the trees felt heavier than before, like something waiting. When night came, the fire turned into our anchor. We sat close, the flames popping, shadows crawling across our faces. Marcus cracked open a cheap beer and tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but nobody laughed much. Lena leaned forward suddenly and asked if anyone else had noticed how quiet the woods had become. No crickets, no distant calls, nothing. Just the snap of our fire and our own breathing. Drew muttered that he didn't like it, and Sarah said she thought she'd seen a figure between the trees when we first lit the fire. She said it quickly, like if she said it slow it'd sound worse. At first we dismissed it, nerves, imagination, the kind of paranoia that grows in the dark. But then, as if on cue, I caught movement near the edge of the firelight. It wasn't clear, just a suggestion of someone standing too still, too tall, half swallowed by the forest. My chest tightened as I tried to focus, and Marcus stood up, yelling into the trees, asking who the hell was out there. No answer came, but the shape didn't move away. It just lingered, like it knew we could see the outline. Sarah gripped my sleeve hard enough to leave marks. Marcus grabbed a flashlight from his truck and swung the beam toward the tree line. For a second, the light cut through branches and revealed nothing but bark and shadow. But when he swept back, I swear I caught a glimpse of a boot, half hidden behind a trunk. The same tread pattern we'd seen in the cabin. My throat went dry. Drew cursed under his breath and said we should pack up right then, leave everything behind if we had to. The fire suddenly felt too small, the forest too large, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been using that cabin was watching us decide what to do. Marcus insisted we weren't leaving in the middle of the night, saying it was too risky to drive those muddy roads in the dark. That decision split the group. Sarah and Drew wanted to go immediately, while Lena and I were torn, glancing between the shrinking fire and the trees beyond. The figure had vanished, but that didn't make it better. Every rustle felt intentional, like someone circling us slowly, testing our nerves. I remember clutching a half-burnt log, not as a weapon that would do much, but just to keep my hands occupied. Hours dragged, and nobody slept. We kept the fire alive with anything we could find. Branches, even damp bark that smoked and stung our eyes. At one point, the sound of footsteps crunched leaves just beyond the light. Not animal, not random, human. Marcus aimed the flashlight again, and this time we caught a clear reflection from something metallic. It disappeared the moment the light hit it, like whoever held it jerked away. That was enough. Drew shouted that we had to leave, and no one argued anymore. We piled into the truck, tossing tents and coolers half-zipped, not caring what we left behind. The drive out was chaos, branches scraping the sides, mud spraying, Marcus swearing as the headlights flickered with every bump. At one point, Sarah screamed that she saw someone running alongside the tree line, keeping pace with us. I didn't look. I couldn't. The moment we hit the gravel road, Marcus gunned it, and we didn't stop until we were back in town, parked under a streetlight like it was the safest place in the world. The next day, we argued about what to do. Report it? Go back for our stuff? In the end, no one wanted to explain why we'd been snooping around a cabin that probably belonged to someone dangerous. Marcus eventually retrieved the truck again, but he didn't find the tents or cooler, only the charred remains of our fire, stomped out, and a set of boot prints circling where we'd been sitting. We never camped together again after that. Even now, years later, whenever I see a fire glowing in the distance, I can't shake the image of someone watching from the dark, waiting for the right moment to step closer.